Hello everybody, I'd like to welcome you to today's morning session. I'd like to welcome the speakers of our first session, Daniel Stromer and Barbara Revueltas Eohercios. And in the following session we will talk about some highly exciting and inspiring topics like new methods of digital imaging, about automated processing of historical data, and about building historical big data from archival records and creating automated life cycles of people, of persons in the 19th century. I think about many of those topics we talked about already yesterday, and I think it's going to be very interesting to see some practical examples. Our first speaker is Daniel Stromer. It's a big pleasure to welcome you among us, especially taking into account that he is a medical engineer and he works mainly in the medical field, and also his PhD he wrote about non-invasive imaging for digital humanities, medicine and quality assessment. I think for us as digital humanists or archivists, at the first glance it sounds a little bit strange, but have medicine and digital humanities in common. But I guess you will be surprised how much we have in common and how much the various disciplines in science cannot be divided anymore in terms of technology. Daniel is currently working at the Friedrich-Alexander Universität in Erlangen, Nuremberg in Germany, and he's part of the pattern recognition lab at the university. And at the same time, he's also part of the Siemens Healthineers, so in the medical field. So Daniel, the floor is yours. We are very curious to listen to your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. How is that working, the presentation? Perfect. So thank you, Thomas, for this very kind introduction, and I'm very happy to give my first in-person talk, since it feels like ages, like 1.5 years or something. And my topic today is browsing through sealed historical documents and non-invasive imaging methods for document digitization. And as Thomas said, my background is basically medical imaging. That's where I'm coming from. So what we do there is we basically do diagnostic imaging, and we acquire images of a human body to take a glimpse into the inside of the human body without cutting it open, to make a diagnosis, to gather digital data, turn that into information, and the information into valuable insights, by just applying imaging and not cutting a body open, for example. And so the translational character of this in this field right now of document digitization is basically that from the one living object, which is a human body, we can translate that to a other living object, which could be a document. And as you know, or for me at least, these are also living documents. Yeah, they age, they turn into different states, and at some points they even turn into dust. And that's what they have in common with a human body in the end. So in general, my outline is that I will motivate my work or our work from our group. Basically, I will show two examples, which is more the European kind of example or use case, historical books. And the other use case that we have is Chinese bamboo scrolls, or Japanese also, with carvings. Then I will show you imaging and image processing methods and hybrid imaging methods that we are currently working on. So let's start with the motivation. So basically, as you know, documents, as I said, are living objects. They can turn into different states. For example, on the top left, you can see the Anna Amalia library documents after the fire. And from the firefighting operations, they also suffered from severe damage through the firefighting operation, basically through water. And now there are like 60,000 volumes that are severely damaged, and as you can imagine, they cannot simply be digitized anymore. But it's a huge manual, tedious effort to basically scan every page and digitize that. And it's not even clear if you can read what is written on there anymore. The other example, which are these two zooms into the page, is from a French library. Basically, what you can see there is when our colleague Dominique Stutzmann opened the book, then the letters from the writings, they just fell off, they peeled off the page. So what he did was he closed the book and didn't open it anymore since then. So you can see down there his hand with the letter M, which just peeled off from the page. And of course there are millions of documents, I guess, out there which have kind of similar things, and the bad thing about this document is that there is no scalable base for that, but there is every document, every historical document at least, is unique on its own and has different kind of conditions. I will come to that later on when I will show you the hybrid imaging approach that we are following. And the other use case, as I said, are bamboo scrolls. So what you can see here is to the right, on the top right, you can see archaeological findings from China, where they found bamboo elements underneath the earth. Yeah. And so what they basically do is that they dig them out, they clean them like you can see it on the bottom in the middle, and then they, again in tedious manual process work, they digitize these objects and try to read what is written on there. And to the bottom right, you can see such a replica scroll from a Chinese tourist shop, basically. How that looked like or how it would look like if you just write it down right now. So I'm generally talking, as I said, about books and scrolls. I don't know what's happening here. And about non-invasive imaging of these. So when it comes to non-invasive imaging, I always show this example because it's recent and it's really nice. So the power of X-ray basically is that it can make the invisible visible. And what you can see here is a part of Peter Bruegel's The Fight Between Carnival and Land, so the painting, where you can see to the left the photograph and to the right an X-ray image. And if you look very closely into the center of this picture, you can see that the original painting shows two fish on this wooden panel, fishes, and you can see on the right where they used X-ray imaging that before that there was a cross on that wooden panel. And I leave it's not my expertise, and I leave it to your imagination why he did that, repainting of his painting. But yeah, it shows that there are structures underneath the top layers of paintings, of books and so on, which might be hidden and which we can reveal with non-invasive imaging methods such as X-ray without peeling off the painting or the top layers of the painting. So basically it's highlighted here. And now Xray CT is a very similar principle because it uses X-ray, and X-ray imaging is 2D imaging, it's just an image. And Xray CT imaging basically gathers a lot of X-ray images and puzzles them together with computer algorithms to a 3D volume, so a 3D volumetric volume. And nowadays, of course, it's normally used for medical purposes because this is the big use case where they use CT, for example, for cancer screenings or for imaging, I don't know, musculoskeletal things and stuff like that. But we want to focus today on documents. And there we can make use of the different material properties of documents and what they consist on. You can imagine if you do an X-ray because you broke your little finger, then you have a bone inside and you have skin around that and fat and muscle in your hand. And if you compare that to a document, you could say that maybe the writing medium is like the skin. It could be pergament, for example, or parchment. And the bone maybe is kind of the ink, because former inks also were like based on metal, like iron gel ink in this case, or malachite ink, or Tyrian purple, whatever ink you like. Many of these inks consisted of dye that was made of metallic particles, at least in the 14th, 15th century and so on. And now we can apply radiation to again distinguish between ink, writing medium, air gaps between the pages, and also for the cover, for example. The bad thing about this is that we apply ionizing radiation. That means we apply a certain dose through the photons that we shoot through the document, and this basically also artificially ages the document, because you can compare it to light, like sunlight, that is applied on a piece of paper. And as you know, it turns yellow after a time because of the acid in the paper and so on. I just want to mention that we are also doing studies on that to reduce the dose, and they look very promising, such that we can say that doing a CT scan of a document is not as harming as, for example, we can only compare it to sunlight, as putting a document an hour into sunlight and so on. We are just working on that right now in our project, and maybe the next time when I'm getting invited by someone here, I can talk way more about that topic. And it works like this, yes. You have a turntable down there where you basically put an object on, an X-ray source and a detector, and then you just rotate the turntable, acquire images, and then what you get out of that is a CT volume. In the center you can see a CT volume of a closed book, which was just scanned as you can see it. And now there's this digital information available in the grayscale values, and to the right you can see a slice through that volume. I have to say this book is a replica, and it's written with iron gel ink, but you can see basically as a proof of concept that all the writings, all the letters are visible due to the material properties of iron gel ink and handmade paper in this case. And then you can basically apply image processing algorithms to extract the pages and then read through the book in a virtual manner. I will show you some examples in a few slides. I just want to introduce a few more modalities, such as phase contrast. This is very new right now, so we haven't presented that yet, but it's really cool, I think, because it shows which potential it has. So phase contrast imaging is very similar to X-ray CT imaging again, just with a few tricks. The resolution of the X-rays get way better. So you get a way better resolution, and you can see very tiny scattering structures. So a scattering structure could be ink on a paper because you have several layers, but it could also be if you press a pen on a piece of paper, then you will have kind of a scratch in the paper, and then you can see that. And now dark field imaging is basically able to see to make this visible. So what we did here is we wrote the letter M without ink on a paper, and just with the pressure, and the normal X-ray image to the left. So it's just, you can see nothing but noise. And on the right, you can see with dark field imaging or phase contrast imaging, basically the pressure that we applied on this piece of paper. And then you can see, without that you ever see this letter written on a page, because there is no ink on this page, that there is something, or there was something. For example, if someone erased also the letter M in this case. So we can also make this visible here. The thing is that this modality is really, really new. There are not many measurement centers that work on that. Fortunately, we have that in Erlangen and can work with this modality. And we have a lot of experiments. For example, also we applied different pressures on a piece of paper, and you can really see, like from slight pressure to a lot of pressure, you can also see the difference in the grayscale values. Basically, it's darker then. Another modality is 3D terahertz. I don't know if you know the works from Sanchez or painting analysis works with 3D terahertz. But this modality uses electromagnetic waves which are not harming for anyone. Basically, this is the technique that is used at the airport if you traveled here, where you have to stand like this and they scan through your clothes if you have weapons or something like that underneath your body. And again, you can translate this technique to documents and scan through several layers of pages. The downside of this method is that it cannot really penetrate very deep. And metal is a reflector. That means if a book cover would be made of metal or something like similar, then we would not be able to look through that. But if you just see on a simple page, yeah, we just did a proof of concept here with 3D Terahertz imaging, where we had this letter L in the center on the recto of a piece of paper. And on the verso, you can see in the terahertz imaging the N on the back. And then you can just basically, again, visualize the letter L and the letter N on this piece of paper. And then you can stack a few pages together and also browse through the stack of paper and see the writings. Right now, I think with the magnetic waves, it depends on the thickness of the pages. But I would say with a normal page thickness, we could image around 20 to 30 pages. And yeah, also this technique is rather new. And we have a lab for that also at the university in Erlangen. And yeah, and what I am basically doing, I'm medical image processor in that sense. I take the digital available data, as I said, and turn it into information, and in the end into valuable insights. So what you can see here is on the top, you can see photographs of the pages of this replica book that we just used for our proof of concept. On the top left, you can see copper-based ink. In the center, you can see iron gel ink, and to the very right, you can see iron gel ink, where I put a little bit more iron in, just to prove that we can really read everything. And on the bottom, you can see virtually extracted pages of that scan CT book. And what we did, or what I did, is basically in a very easy way. I try to explain it like that you can also get the idea. Is basically on this pile of digital data, you need to assign labels to each page. Basically, every pixel in that image has to be assigned to a page, air, the cover, and so on. And then I say, this is page 1, this is page 2, this is page 3. And then I flatten it digitally and put it on a 2D image such that everyone can read it with the naked eye. And then you can see when you do that and let the algorithm go, which takes maybe half an hour or an hour for such a stack of data, then you can basically read the pages through. What you can also see is that you may not be able to read everything, but at least you get a rough idea of what could be the content of this document. And without even opening, without destroying any structures, but keeping it in its original state. And afterwards, of course, you could still manually process that, but you already have an idea of what is written in there, and what is the content, and where is maybe structure where I need to take special care if I do a manual digitization. I also want to show you the example of the bamboo scroll. So basically what we did is we put it in soil artificially and scanned it with CT, so it was completely covered with soil. Here on the top right you can see the example which we just made for, I would say, marketing purposes, that you can still see that the writings on that bamboo scroll, which is carved into the bamboo. And you can also see the soil. And by the way, this is not black and white, because we used a technique used for medical imaging, which is called cinematic rendering. It's a virtual reality or augmented reality kind of method, where you can color everything in natural colors. So that's why it looks like kind of a photograph. Yeah, so basically normally you use this method, for example, if you have a medical image of a human body, to visualize blood flow in red, or muscles in pink, or something like that, and bones in white. But of course we can also translate this again from the medical field to our documents and visualize that nicely. So now to read that in a digital way, what I did is I basically virtually cleaned this scroll. So what I did is I learned my algorithm, what is a bamboo scroll element and what is soil, because the structures are very different. And then the algorithm was trained to erase the entire soil. So on the bottom you can now see the virtually cleaned bamboo scroll. And in the next step we can virtually unwrap this scroll. Basically I assign a label to, this is the first element, this is the second, the third, fifth, and so on. And I extract each of these elements and put them and stack them next to each other, and then we can basically, from the soil scroll, read all the content that was written or carved into this wood. So on the bottom you can really see the scan, which is here on the bottom, on the top. Yeah, so it's soiled, it's wrapped up, it's dirty, and on the bottom it's just virtually cleaned, virtually unwrapped, and digitally available and readable for the naked eye. And here also a zoom into that. So the scroll has maybe a dimension of 15 centimeters and a diameter of 5 centimeters. The carvings have a depth of around 1 millimeter. And the writing has maybe, I don't know, 3 millimeters of, or let's say 5 millimeters heave. So also very fine structures can be clearly seen in here. So why did I introduce all that modalities? Because now we have a research project going on, funded by the German Research Association, where we want to combine all these imaging methods that all have their downsides and their advantages, and we want to smartly connect these modalities based on the document that we have. And therefore I created a kind of space in my mind of what could be a document, and I said, like, there are different conditions like deterioration, there are different types, a scroll, a book, there's different support, there's different inks, covers, and so on. And on the other hand, we have different modalities like Xray CT, normal Xray imaging, phase contrast, Terahertz, and maybe even photography and so on. And now we want to, in this research project, work on a guideline that where we can say, okay, we have now a certain document. This document is a book. It's made of paper. It is written with a metallic ink and has a ivory cover, I don't know. Which modality combination would be now the right modality combination, also with measurement parameters, to image this book, that we can afterwards have the optimal outcome in terms of a digital volume where we can browse through. As you can imagine, this is a very big effort, because we in the end need to boil it down to use cases that make sense. And therefore we just said in the beginning we will start with books that are made of handmade paper and written with iron gall ink, and copper ink, for example, but also oil-based. So these three inks we picked out, and that's where we start with. But in the end, our dream would be that this would be a public or open source project where everyone can contribute with its own research, and this kind of guideline is then growing by time and time and time, and in the end, in some years and maybe some decades, we have a nice solution to digitize all kinds of documents that are available in the space here. Yeah. So in the end, I want to highlight our cooperation partners. As I said, this is very translational, and on the top you can see the institutes from the FAU. Of course, we are connected with the Time Machine, where my professor Andreas Meyer is in the board. And on the bottom you can see also other cooperation partners from Germany, Austria, but also in Shanghai, the Chiang University, and also medical company Siemens Healthineers, of course, because they have, in Fraunhofer, because they have really huge expertise in the technique of imaging data and digitizing these hidden contents. So thank you for the invitation. It was really nice that I got this invitation from you and that I can present our work. And now I would say let's discuss about our research and what your ideas are, what we could do in the future, because in the end we all need to work together on these topics. Thank you. By the way, on the top right you can see a cinematic rendering of this book volume. So this is again artificially colored.
For that highly impressive presentation. I think it opens up fundamentally new perspective in terms of capturing historical information in books. And I think what we learned was also that also in the digital world it's necessary to clean scrolls like you showed from soil. So that was really interesting. So that also there the soil has to be given away. I would like to now to give you the floor in order to ask Daniel questions. Are there any questions in the audience?
Thank you for your presentation. I'm Anabela Ribeiro from Portugal, National Archive, and I'm the responsible from Conservation Department now. And this presentation is very important because we have a lot of problems with ironic, you know, is a big problem in the archives. And when I see this presentation, I think if we apply this technique and the technology, I can access all information of the documents that we have in poor condition, okay? But what I must do, I need to restore or not restore, okay? Or I must only to conserve. I digitize and conserve only. Because in the future can appear another techniques, and I must conserve original, not eliminate, okay? But I think we have a lot of questions in the archives, what we must do in the conservation, okay? But these help a lot to identify and read and to research. It's very important, this work. Thank you so much. And in the future, I will need to talk with you. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. You're very welcome to talk to me, of course. Just one note to that. So this is not a product that someone can buy. It's right now, this is proof of concept and still very basic research. But our idea is, so what you do right now is, for example, you take your books, you take the valuable documents and drive them, for example, to the linear accelerator to Grenoble or somewhere. And we want to basically not bring the document to the scanner, but bring the scanner to the document, such that you don't need to drive documents around and pay tons of insurance costs. This is very costly, of course, to bring valuable documents or exponents to scanner centers. But our idea is the other way around. Until this could be on a, let's say, publicly available as a product, there will be several years, maybe decades, where you can buy a system where someone can promise you that you will be able to read everything that is in a book. For example, if you have, what's the English word for Tintenfraß? Like the iron gall ink, when it eats itself through the paper, then you have these kind of holes in the paper. I don't know the English word for that. But of course, you can't restore what is not there anymore, for example. Just a few hints to that. But yeah, we need to do a lot of more experiments, but then we can also say what is possible and what is not possible. Yeah. And this can only happen together with people out of all these fields that have the expertise, because our expertise in the end is just to image this. All the expertise that has to go into the steps before that, like this document makes sense, this doesn't make sense to image. It's easier for me to put it into a scan robot or something like that. That has to come from the experts of that, and we basically in the end just take this information and process it with our methods. But very nice, thank you. Other questions?
Maybe somebody in the chat has a question. I have a very practical question. How does that practically work? Do you need a hospital with an X-ray station to do that, or how do you do that, and how long does the process take to capture the image and to process the image so that you get the results you've shown us?
Can you call back the presentation? Because I have one backup slide that shows that. Mm-hmm. It's the last slide of the slide deck. So basically, for X-ray CT, there are several machines for that. An X-ray machine is normally, so in the industrial sector, normally used for automotive industry, where, for example, you have screws where they have a serial failure. Wait. So this is this X-ray machine. They have a serial failure, and then they want to make a diagnosis of the screw, why there is this kind of crack in the screw or something. And therefore they have these machines which have a dimension of around 3 meters and 1.50 meters in the back. And they have to be in a closed environment with constant temperature and so on. On the bottom right you can see the scanner. A scan takes around 2 hours. We're also working on reducing scan time by keeping the resolution and everything in place. So let's say maybe in the end we can boil it down to 1 hour, but I think that doesn't make that much difference. Because in the end you of course want to have the optimal outcome of the digital one. The other scanners are really easy to, like X-ray is just putting this image in there, and taking the image takes a second if it's a 2D page. Terahertz is very easy, as you can see it from the Terahertz scanners at the airports, where you basically scan 3 seconds of a body. And phase contrast, this is a different story, as it is really, really basic research right now. But I would say if you have such a system, it's a 1 or a 2 hour scan. Maybe the digital processing afterwards, at the moment the image processing, would take a day or something. You can somehow compare it to taking photographs and then from a wedding or so, and then working with it on Photoshop such that you can have the optimal outcome out of that. but no more than that, yeah. Such a scanner, by the way, don't want to make any kind of advertisement, but such a scanner costs around 250,000 euros, starting from 125,000 euros. I mean, there's no limit when it comes to the money that you can spend on that, but like 250,000 euros for such a scanner is normal. But I guess in the end it pays it out, yeah. And maybe if there's a new field like digital humanities that would go into this market, also they would adapt the scanners such that they really fit to that. Because the purpose of the scanner is not scanning documents. They are not optimized for them. We just work with it and optimize it ourselves. They are optimized for imaging basically metals like screws, nails, motor blocks, even entire cars you can measure. And yeah, and there's definitely there could be definitely optimization done by the scanner industry itself, because we can only tune into several, like when it comes to the X-ray dose and so on, we can only work on a specific band of I don't know, measurement parameters, because the system can't do less than, I don't know, some kind of kV energies and so on. Yeah.
Yeah. One more question.
Thank you very much for your presentation. As Annabella said, we have a big problem with these iron gall inks, because these inks transfer materials to rectovers of the same page and even to other pages. Do you have in mind, or do you foresee to with this technique to know where are the primary inks in the document? That means there are a lot of stains. Normally in this kind of documents, everything is mixed. So maybe, I don't know, for the quantity of ink, can you read this primary handwriting or originally, so or it is not, it's out of question?
No, you can definitely differentiate between different inks. For example, copper and iron gall, it has different flow. So flow, what is that? Properties when you write on it, like the iron has like clear borders. Copper, for example, is more like sprinkled around and so on. And if you, I don't know, we didn't test it yet, but at least we tested different iron gall inks with different metal particle concentrations, and you can see a difference by the contrast. So a lot of iron means very white writings because it gives a lot of absorption. Very slight iron portions of iron means that you can just slightly see the writings. You could see that. But we didn't experiment on that. But this is very interesting indeed. Yeah. So in the end we are looking to also color the inks, for example, copper in blue, iron gall in black, and so on, and maybe reddish inks in red, artificially, like that we can say this is the algorithm. The computer detects this ink to be iron gall, so it's black, and this one is malachite ink. It's bluish, and then also color the volumes, like the grayscale volumes, into these colors. For example, if you have the first letter on a page in red, that it's red, and that you can see that this is written with a different ink than the others. So this is what we think about, and we started experiments on that. But I mean, these algorithms are very data hungry. That means you need tons of pages that you would have to scan. And we just started, so to have outcomes that we can present somewhere, we need way more data for this. But very interesting topic.
We have a question in the chat referring to the example with Rugel's work of art. When scanned, how do you detect the difference between the hidden cross image and the visible fish's image. How do you know which is hidden and which is visible?
How do you know what? Which
is visible and which is hidden?
Which is visible and which is hidden? Yeah, well, you can see, so this is an example that we did not image, by the way. This was in the press in the New York Times. But you can, basically, you can see, you can see, of course, the fish on the painting with naked eye, but also in terahertz, in X-ray imaging, it's basically invisible. You cannot differentiate. If you just have the X-ray imaging, you cannot say that there's a fish on this painting. It's simply not possible. As again, the hand example, when you scan a hand with an X-ray device, you won't see the skin because it's invisible for the rays. You can just see it with, for example, terahertz imaging, where you have layers where you can scroll through, where you would see there is a fish and in the next layer there is a cross maybe. But with X-ray imaging there's no, so everything that is invisible like air or something you can't see. You simply can't see it.
Yeah, so thank you very much.